Okay, our next session is being presented by Michael Spencer, Chair of the DC Rental Housing Commission, and Dan Mayer, Attorney Advisor of the DC Rental Housing Commission. Gentlemen.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Y'all dry. Can we do a little better? Come on. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I'm telling you, you can talk. So talk. So good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate that. I'm Mike Spencer. I'm the Chairman and Chief Administrative Judge of the DC Rental Housing Commission. And this is Dan Mayer, who is the most extraordinary attorney in DC government, as you will soon see. We have probably the toughest job here today, and that's to convince you that this is fun, what we're going to discuss. It's tedious, it's long coming. This is the first time in 28 years that we've touched these regulations, the first time in 32 years that we've done a comprehensive change. And this version has been around for 32 years. So this is very important work, and most importantly, it's work that we hope that each and every one of you will be a part of. This is the way democracy works, and so if you want to be a part of something, maybe for the next 32 years, here's your opportunity. Just to start off, I always like to tell folks that I'm a very proud DC boy. I'm a third generation. Grew up in Anacostia. I live in Hillcrest now. Exactly, Ward 7. My mom used to work at the Rental Accommodations Division for many, many years. So as a kid, I will often spend my time after school hanging out at DCRA. So this is true to us. I want to start, too, by recognizing a few folks in the room. Johanna Streve, the Chief Advocate for DC. Thanks for putting this on. I want to recognize Polly Donaldson, DHCD's Director. I want to recognize, of course, I don't think Mayor Bowser's here, but I want to recognize Mayor Bowser as well. My predecessor, I understand, is somewhere here, and I see him now. I want to have him stand up. This is Peter Segedy-Mazak, who for many years worked on these rules. And so, in part, I don't want to just take the credit because him, along with Dan and other folks at the commission, spent a lot of time on these rules. Let me explain our role so you understand. So we play two roles in the government, three. We are quasi-judicial, so we're like a court. We function like a court. We hear cases. We may have cases at the commission now that some of you are parties to. We do not discuss those cases. Don't ask us anything about your case, because we aren't going to answer you, okay? And that's because it's illegal for us. And I still owe student loans, and so I need my money to pay my bills, and I cannot lose my job. The second role that we play is quasi-legislative, and that's the rulemaking role. And so that's when we're sort of like fake DC counsel in this particular stage. And that's when we can engage with you, and when it's important for you to be a part of this and say, hey, look, we think you're wrong, or we think this particular part of the statute needs clarity. And that's what we're going to discuss today. And the third part is once a year, we basically say, based on metrics, not based on what we come up with, how much your rent can be increased legally each year. Just to give you some framework, if you live in a subsidized unit, it's likely not under rent control, okay? If your unit was built after 1975, not rent control. If your landlord owns less than 4 places, 4 or less in the DC, okay, we get mood lighting. Likely not rent control. And lastly, if it was occupied when the act took effect, not rent control. With that said, again, we're very happy you're here. I'm going to turn it over to Dan, who's going to go through some slides, and maybe we'll have time for questions at the end as well. Thank you.
Okay, do we have the clicker forward back? Okay. All right, well, if we don't have the notes up. All right. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I am Dan Mayer, Attorney Advisor with the Rental Housing Commission. Hello, 1, 2, 3, better, okay. Hi, okay, and, oh, there's light, okay. Great, I can actually see you all too. I'm Dan Mayer, Attorney Advisor with the Rental Housing Commission, and now I can hear myself, that's good. So I'm here to give you an overview of what the rulemaking process looks like, what we're doing in the rulemaking process, and how you can be a part of it. So to start off, what exactly is a rulemaking? We all kind of know what acts are statutes. They're passed by Congress, by the council, by a state legislature, the old Schoolhouse Rock, just a bill, that whole process. But we don't talk too much about agency rulemaking, where after the legislature passes an act, they will often create an agency, like the commission, and they will authorize that agency to write rules that are more specific usually than the broad language that the council will use. The process for the agency is called notice and comment rulemaking. I'll explain how that works in a bit. When the agency does it, the rules have to be within what the act says. So we were just talking about, the 1975 cutoff or the 4-unit small landlord exemption. So we can write a lot of rules about what exactly you have to file, what you have to prove, that you only own 4 units or less. But we can't say, well, we think it should be 5 units or we think it should be 2 units. So it's limited, but there's flexibility. And so that's where a lot of the complications come in and why we have such a long rulemaking. They also set details, like I said, how things get filed, how cases get handled by the agency, filling in some of those gaps that are left when the council writes a very broad law. Little bit of detail, as we all know, it's the Rental Housing Act 1985. The Commission issued rules implementing the 1985 Act in 1986, but long story, the rules haven't been updated since 1998. And as we were discussing just before we got up, now is the time of updating them. We put out a proposed rulemaking on August 2nd of this year, and we are in a 90-day comment phase where we are waiting for responses from the public of what people think about them. What is in the rules? Let's just talk about this to be a little more specific here. I have notes on this. When we talk about it, we talk about the procedures that the Rental Housing Commission and that the Rental Accommodations Division with the rent administrator that they use for how their office operates, how our office operates, how cases are handled, how you'll file things with our offices, how you get attorney's fees if you win your case. Those are in there too. So these are pretty important if you've ever had a tenant petition, for example, or you've ever opposed a housing provider's petition. You might have dealt with these rules and kind of know a little bit about how they work and how they don't work sometimes. The hearing process has changed, so Chapter 40 there goes away. I'll get to that in a minute. Registration and exemptions. So this applies to every housing accommodation and every housing provider, landlords, buildings, in the district, is that you have to register the property. And you can claim that you're exempt from rent control when you register, but like I was saying with the small landlord and how you prove how many units you own, there are a lot of complicated rules about that and a lot of complicated rules about giving notice to tenants. Again, some of you may have dealt with these. 42, this is the big one. This is how rent control works. This is when the rent can go up. This is how much it can go up by, what you have to file, the notice you have to give to tenants, how housing providers can get larger rent increases than the normal one that we publish every year, how tenants can get rent refunds by filing petitions, how landlords have to comply with the housing code. That's another big part. So I think there's probably going to be a lot of interest and a lot of comments on this. I'll go into a little detail on some of that in a second here. And then 43, evictions, retaliation, tenant rights. This again applies not just to rent controlled properties. This is part of the Rental Housing Act outside of rent control. Notices to vacate, what they have to give you, how much time they have to give you, that they can't retaliate against you if you exercise your rights, like Johanna's here encouraging everyone this morning to do. And other tenant rights, late fees, organizing, some situations you can get out of a lease, things like that. Demolition and conversion, not too much going on. I think our friends at the Housing Authority were talking a little bit about some of those rules. Relocation assistance is in there, although that hasn't changed very much in the last few years. So why? Why do we do a top-to-bottom review of what is currently 120 pages of rules, and why do we turn it into 200 pages of rules? First is that the council has passed a lot of laws, and I'll give you that a little on that in a second. The biggest one was rent ceiling abolition, which Sean mentioned this morning, 2006. That was a pretty fundamental change to the way rent control works in the district. Is that, I'll show you in a second, but it was pretty fundamental and it required changing a lot of the way the rules are written. Office of Administrative Hearings, if you have a tenant petition, if your housing provider files a petition, they now hear cases on those petitions and how that gets handled, how it gets handed off from one agency to the other. That needed a lot of rewriting of what the process looks like. And generally, we have an obligation to you, to the public, that we need the rules and the system to be clear and to work as well as possible. So we've done a lot to make it so that if you read these rules, if you slog through them, you should know that if you do 1, 2, 3, and 4, you can increase the rent or you can challenge a rent increase. It should be pretty clear, pretty specific. This is what the process is. And so we had to make a lot of updates to that too. The rules were written in 1986. It doesn't say anything about whether or not you can file something by email. There was no email. So that needed to be updated. That's just one little procedural improvement that we could make. So as I was mentioning, that first big one, that big change, rent ceilings were abolished in 2006. And we're playing a little bit of catch up here on getting that integrated into the rules. But when the act was passed, the main way that it worked was there was a rent ceiling, and you couldn't charge more than the rent ceiling. And the rules tracked how often you were increasing the rent ceiling, how often you were increasing the rent that was charged. Now, there were some issues with that I don't think we have time to go into. But in 2006, the council said no more rent ceilings. They said we're going with regulating the rent charged. There were then, after a few years, some issues that came up with a little bit of a gray area as to whether rent charged meant a number that was being filed or rent charged meant what was on the lease. For those who've been involved and active in this issue, I can assure you the law has changed. Definitely as of 2018, it is the rent that is actually charged. So other things, we have a lot of work to do. The council has been very busy. A lot of you have been down at the council advocating for all of these laws that have passed since the last time the rules were updated, and it keeps going. So a lot of work dealing with the details of all of these. There's no quiz, I promise. A lot that we had to do, and a lot that we had to look at. So if you were involved in those, keep that in mind. Whoops, this is old version. Okay, don't worry about this. Kind of looks like that. We don't have time for that. So what is notice and comment? Now, we've gone over a little bit of the substance of what we're doing here. So let's talk about the process. As I said, in August, we put out proposed rules. That's the first look for the public. So they're not in effect yet. They will be once we hear back from people, once we make changes, and we will possibly even have to do a second proposal. But right now, this is out there for everyone to comment on. So we're required to take public input, and it'll come from everybody. It's not just going to be tenant activists. It's not just going to be people who live in rent-controlled units or who are tenants. Housing providers are going to comment. Lawyers are going to comment. Anyone in the general public who wants to can also comment. October 31st, end of the comment period. So this is your chance to be involved in the process, like Michael was saying. And for those who have had cases, again, the comment process is not like when you're in front of the commission on an appeal or if you're going to court where you're going to file something, you're going to wait for us to issue an order in response to you personally. This is going to be more like when you go down to the council and you say, Ms. Bonds, I like this law, you need to pass it. I don't like this law, you shouldn't pass it, or you should change this word or that word. So how do you make a comment? It is a written comment period. So you will write into us and tell us what you think about it. Is this rule good for what you're concerned about? Is it good for tenants? Is it good for housing? Is it good for housing providers? We're going to hear that too. One of the best things that you can do in a comment is tell us how this is going to play out in the real world. If you've had a dispute with your landlord and it's come down to there was a particular rule and that changed what happened, you won, they won, is that rule good? Is the rule bad? Should it change? Are we talking about changing it? And we should keep our hands off of it because this really saved your housing and your rent levels. You can tell us those stories. That's really good for us to know because we just, we sit in an office and think about these things, but we don't always live the consequences. A little something for the lawyers. Does it follow from the text and purpose of the statute? If you've been down at the council on any of those 20 bills I just showed you, and you said, this is a great bill, we need to pass it, because it's going to change 1, 2, and 3, and the commission's proposing a rule, and it looks like we're changing 4, 5, and 6. This is a chance to tell us, that's not what we were talking about 10 years ago when we passed something. This is what we thought it was going to look like. So let us know that you think we're following the statute or not. And like I said, housing providers are going to weigh in on this too. So if you just want to make a comment that, we need to be more tenant friendly, keep in mind, we're going to be hearing that we need to be more housing provider friendly too. So this is about you making your best case. I said it's about 200 pages of rules. So you don't need to comment on everything. Comment on what you know about if that's what's most helpful. You've got a lot of great resources here today of people who you can work with, lighten the load a little bit. This is a personal favor to me, so I will be taking in the comments as they come in, and I'll be organizing them for the commissioners. So please, if you're commenting, just a little bold, Section 3802 is wrong. Section 4205 is wrong. Organize your comments to help me personally, and to help yourself really, because if you want to just write a long statement about how important rent control is, that's great, but I'm not going to necessarily see that somewhere in the middle you said, by the way, you're wrong on Rule 3802. So what you can do to organize is going to help you make your case. And like I said, personal stories are good, but these are public records. Don't get too personal. So a little bit of the nuts and bolts on it. You can get a copy of the proposed rulemaking from the commission. Our website as of Tuesday will be rhc.dc.gov. That's finally agreed with Octo? Okay. Call us. We can send you a copy. I know OTA has a copy too if you've been in touch with them. It's officially on dcregs.dc.gov. That's not the best, easiest to use website. But they're also up there, and the current rules are up there too if you want to kind of compare how things are changing. And then for submitting comments, you could mail or deliver them to us. We're just down at Judiciary Square up on the 11th floor. But as I said, just email me. There's my email, daniel.mayer@dc.gov. I am the intake point on this. So if you want to write up a little Word document and attach it, or you just want to write a long email, the Word document's probably better, but email your comments in is probably the best thing to do. So where do we go from here? As I mentioned, October 31st, 2019 is 90 days after we published it, so that's the comment period that we've gone with. If your comment is, this is the first I'm hearing of it and this wasn't a long enough comment period, process comments are fair, right? You can say that. More engagement would be better in the future. We'll take a look. I'm not going to make any promises on how long it's going to take to go over all the comments that we get. And after that, we will meet with people who have commented, with stakeholders, with activists. We're going to try to hash out what the rules need to be. If we can get it from 190 to officially over 200 pages, that'll be a neat little feather. As I said, if we make a lot of changes, the law requires us to go through a second process, right? You have to have notice of what the rules are going to be. So we would have to put out a second proposal possibly if we make a lot of changes based on those comments. And then once we've got a proposal out there that everyone is more or less happy with, we will go to a final rulemaking and it will take effect. So that's it, everyone, for what it looks like when the Rental Housing Commission updates the rules and what you're going to be looking at with it. So we look forward to hearing from you all and working with all of you in the future. And back to Michael.
All right, we're the last act before lunch, so I'm going to finish up really quickly. One, I'm not sure if Councilmember Bonds is here, but I also wanted to personally recognize her for her support to the commission and housing affordability across the city, as well as the other council members. Are there any questions for us? Any questions whatsoever? I see one in the back. Yes? Oh, is there a card system here? Oh, okay. All right, this is where can I obtain a paper copy of the amendments to the regulations? Yeah, honestly, the easiest way, if you want an actual paper copy from us, probably either coming by the office or contacting the office. I'll give you our office number. It's 202 442 8949. And we're in Judiciary Square. I think it's called 1 Judiciary Square on the 11th floor, 1140 B North. So it's like IT is one room, they're A and we're B. So it's just a little weird, but we're right there. Any other questions? Any other cards? 202-442-8949 is our number. And I just want to emphasize again, like, I think this is a pretty cool opportunity to be a part of these regulations. A lot of the folks who worked on the regulations, we worked with DHCD, the rent administrator, Lauren Pear, Keith Anderson, who's a legend in DC, worked on these regulations with us. OAH, the judges down at the Office of Administrative Hearings. I know we've worked with partners at OTA as well. A lot of lawyers looked at these regulations, and they're written like a lot of lawyers looked at these regulations too. And so I want you all to feel like you could be a part of this. So even if the language isn't clear, like, tell us that. Another thing that may be helpful is working with folks at OTA, at Legal Aid, at other nonprofit organizations, tenant associations around the city. So if you feel like, you know what, that's a lot of work, which it is, I'm not interested, have somebody else help you with your lifting. All right. Okay, so this is another question. People having money problems, paying rent, don't have internet, may not know internet well. How do we get a paper copy of the law? So again, just call us. We may have some money left in our budget to send it out, but we'll have some money because the fiscal year starts on Tuesday. So call us after Tuesday. Don't call tomorrow, Monday. So just call us. But with that, we do encourage your input. We will come out. Call OTA too. They have more money than we have. Look at this. And we do encourage you to come out. We'll have stakeholder meetings. If you have recommendations as to where we should go to host those engagement sessions, also give us that input. So thanks for having it. Yes. We haven't decided yet. They'll be after October. Well, you are a stakeholder if you're here. Okay. Well, I'm gonna tell you what what was the last part? Okay, so let me. All right, I'm gonna be clear here. I mentioned earlier that I'm a DC boy, right? Okay, well, I'm gonna talk now, and so a part of this is this: the way we see stakeholders, we're impartial. I don't care if you're a housing provider. I don't care if you're a tenant. If you read our decisions, that will be very clear. We only follow the law. That's all we do is follow the law. That's it. If my mama was there and she was on the opposite side of the decision, mama gonna be short that day because we follow the law, okay? So let me say this. When I say stakeholders, I mean tenants, I mean landlords, I mean anybody who has a real interest in DC, right? It could be, you can be 18 years old and you know in 4 years you're looking for an apartment and you have an interest in what's gonna be available to you. Right? That's what we mean when we say stakeholders. I don't care if you live in the unit or you don't live in the unit. We all have an interest in keeping DC diverse, I think economically vibrant for everyone who wants to live here. So that's what I mean when I say stakeholder. When we could disagree to that point, with that, time is up. It's lunchtime. Enjoy your weekends. Thanks for coming out and being a part of this.